the weekend, the world turned its focus to the Paris attack that left more than 120 people dead and around 100 injured. And just 2 weeks ago, experts revealed that a Russian airliner that crashed over the Sinai in Egypt, killing all 224 passengers on board, was caused by a bomb that Islamic extremists claimed responsibility for. But these are only two of the incidents that have been highlighted this year alone. In Africa, several countries are waging a war against terror. We've seen bomb blasts in Beirut and elsewhere in the world. Now, joining us today is Afro-Middle East Center researcher Omar Shaukat. He's here to give us his views. You're an expert on ISIS, on ISIS, Omar. Just give us your views with what happened in Paris last week.
First of all, thank you for having me, and I wish I can be given the same kind of time that your previous guest had, because then we can really discuss ISIS. But look, I think when we're discussing ISIS in relation to Paris, first of all, we should remember this is not something new that ISIS has done. For the last year, since the bombing campaign in Iraq has started against ISIS, they've been carrying out these threats for a very long time against Western nations, against Arab countries, and they have already carried it out in Tunisia, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Yemen, now in Paris. So the world is now turning its attention towards Paris because it's a Western country. So there is a lot of discussion about it. But I think the one last thing to maybe keep in mind is that ISIS actually might be at its weakest point. That's why it's trying to engage in these spectacular attacks, in a way mirroring what Al-Qaeda was doing with 9/11, at which point it was at its weakest point. And it did whatever it did in order to elicit a reaction. Yeah. So maybe ISIS is doing that. I'm not sure, but it could be, because I think territory is being taken from them, but not at such a rate that we would like.
Do you expect a united global response now in Syria?
No, I do not. I don't think the Syrian problem will be resolved until all the countries can see eye to eye on what needs to be done. And given the divisions between Iran and Saudi Arabia, I don't think they will come to that agreement. And effectively, when it comes to the resolution of the Syrian conflict, we're talking about Iran and Iran and Saudi Arabia, not USA, France, Russia. These are world powers, but they've backed aside. Those sides need to come together.
You talk about a weakening of ISIS that you believe is happening. Just tell us about the strength and the strongholds that you believe is at the heart of this organization.
I think to understand what's going on right now with ISIS, we need to keep in mind what happened and how they built their organization in the first incarnation of the group back in 2006. Even at that time, ISIS itself, the ideological recruits of ISIS were not that many. It was called it had a different name. So I'm just going with ISIS right now. And what they were actually able to tap into was a lot of dissatisfaction with the central government, with the situation in occupied Iraq at that time. And something similar is happening right now. The large number of Sunni tribes that have allied with them, they could potentially be turned away from them, because I don't think they are ideological allies. But who are they going to turn to? The Iraqi government has alienated them. The Syrian government has alienated them. So that's the bigger issue over here. And this weakening, I also want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that territory, like I said earlier on, is being taken away at a very fast pace. But because they're not expanding and they need to keep their brand and logo alive, they might be asking their regional affiliates to engage in more action, so that that can generate the news around the world.
So you believe that because of this, we'll start to see more isolated attacks on in this case, European member countries?
Whether we'll see them or not, I don't know. Whether ISIS will try to attempt that, yes, I think so. But again, when we say ISIS will try to do so, we should keep in mind that there are lots of groups that have had an independent reality of ISIS before and after their affiliation with ISIS, just like in the Russian plane case that we were discussing earlier on. That group has been around for a long time, before ISIS even came around. When ISIS came around, got all the global media attention, then they offered their allegiance to ISIS, and now they're known as an ISIS branch. So similarly, things with Boko Haram and a section of the Shabab, these are not necessarily ISIS groups. They have local problems, but because they get more attention, they'll affiliate themselves with ISIS.
Now, there's a lot of conspiracy theories doing the rounds. it's a little bit muddled about who supports who and who gets weapons from who in the Middle East and so forth. There's even talk about ISIS being, in some instances, supported by Western nations. What do you make of that kind of talk, even that Israel could be mimicking some of these attacks? Well, what do you make of this kind of talk?
Okay, so I don't think, first of all, we have enough evidence to say that at the highest policy-making level, at that level, the policymakers have decided to supply ISIS with weaponry and trying to manipulate ISIS for their own good. Things like that have happened in the past. I don't think we have evidence to say that about ISIS. For example, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, they were directly supported at the highest policy-making levels in Pakistan, in the US, versus the Russians. Something like that could be happening. I don't have evidence for it. But on the other hand, when people use the information that is available, passing of weapons, American-made weaponry or Chinese-made weaponry, and people will splash those pictures on social media and then say, look, Americans or Israelis are behind this. This is a war zone. Weapons will enter in from any and every place. The Western nations and Israelis, along with Jordanians, Saudis, Qataris, a bunch of countries, they've supplied rebels with weapons. Those rebels in the battlefield switch sides. Some get killed. Weapons get smuggled. Weapons get traded on black markets. So I don't read too much into just the transference of weapons.
Yeah. Well, Omar, as you said yourself, we could carry on with this interview for much longer, but we run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us and giving us a unique, interesting perspective on ISIS and how the organization works. And interesting take is that they could be at their weakest point right now. Omar Shaukat, thanks for joining us.